Coming up on Network Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan reach an agreement on the filling and operation of the mega dam being built on the River Nile. The United States calls for a new approach to address the growing security instability in Mali. Plus, Germany to hold talks with Libya's General Khalifa Haftar in diplomatic push to end the conflict in Tripoli. Hello and welcome to the program, everyone. I'm Layo Adegoke. Egypt, Ethiopia and Sudan have reached an initial agreement on the filling and operation of the mega dam being built on the River Nile. A joint statement by the three countries, along with the U.S. and the World Bank, says negotiators have agreed to fill the reservoir of the Grand Ethiopia Renaissance Dam during the rainy season between the months of July and August. It, however, makes no mention on the most important point of the dispute, which is the speed with which to fill up the mega dam. Ethiopia wants to do it in 6 years, but Egypt has proposed at least a 10-year period, fearing that a shorter span will affect the downstream flow of the River Nile, which it relies on for 90% of its water. A final deal will be signed on 28 and 29 January when ministers from the three countries meet again in Washington. Let's speak to Edward Yeranian, the VOA's correspondent in Egypt, to get more perspective on this. Hello, Edward. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, this row over the Nile Dam has been on for a while. Why is it so contentious between Egypt and Ethiopia? And Sudan is also caught in between all of this. This is so contentious between Egypt and Ethiopia, the row over the Nile Dam. It seems we don't have Edward Yeranian. Let's move on now to other stories. The U.S. has called for a new approach to address the growing instability in Mali. Now, the U.S. Deputy Ambassador to the UN Security Council, Cheryl Norman, is calling for the 15,000-strong peacekeeping force to be reduced in size. She says it's time to recognize that peacekeeping missions are not the answer to the growing terrorist threats in Mali, and criticize both the government and armed groups for failing to implement a 2015 peace deal. The comments are likely to concern France, which is leading the international military efforts against Islamist militants in the Sahel region. It has been calling for more countries to commit troops and resources to address the growing insecurity there. Now, also speaking during the Security Council meeting is UN Peacekeeping Chief Jean-Pierre Lacroix. He says the security situation in Mali and in the Sahel region as a whole is deteriorating at an alarming rate, with an increase in improvised explosive device attacks against convoys.
The rapid and thorough implementation of the peace agreement remains the only viable path for the stabilization of Mali. It provides the framework for the required political and institutional reforms to restore and decentralize state authority, to build a Malian state that reflects the diversity and interest of all its citizens. The peace agreement also provides for mechanisms to address the grievances of those Malians who feel excluded from the country's political life and economic development and who see little hope for their future. Increased and sophisticated capabilities notwithstanding, MINUSMA can only be as effective and efficient as the parties and partners want it to be. Political will remains the most important enabler for any peacekeeping operation to be effective. I therefore reiterate the Secretary General's appeal to all Malian leaders to display the necessary leadership and work together to address the challenges their country is facing with the support of the international community.
So we'll go back to our main story, talking about the latest talks to resolve the dispute between Ethiopia and Egypt over the future of a giant hydropower project on the Nile River. Now, last year, a deadline of 15 January was set to resolve the long-standing impasse, but the latest round of talks has also agreed that they've come to an agreement, by the way. When complete, the Grand Renaissance Dam, which Ethiopia is building, will be Africa's biggest hydroelectric power plant. We now have joining us to get more perspective on this from Ethiopia. We have an Ethiopian journalist, Brooke Abdu, joins us from Addis Ababa. Thank you for speaking to us on Network Africa.
Thank you very much, and nice to be on the show for the second time.
So what is the Ethiopian government's stance on this issue in the light of the latest agreement made?
Well, negotiations, the feeling of Ethiopia, Sudan,
Seems like we're having a bit of audio problems today. Let's move on to the conflict in Libya. Now, Germany's Foreign Minister Heiko Maas is due to hold talks in Libya's second city, Benghazi, with renegade General Khalifa Haftar, whose forces are fighting the UN-backed government in the North African country. Mr. Maas, who spoke to Libyan Prime Minister Fayez al-Sarraj last week, is holding today's talks on behalf of EU foreign ministers ahead of a planned Libya summit in Berlin at the weekend. He's asking both sides to seek a diplomatic solution to the conflicts. Back here in Nigeria, when you talk about innovation and entrepreneurial spirit, Nigerians have got it. In Anambra State, southeastern part of Nigeria, an inventor, Emeka Ugwueze, runs a mini technology lab from his backyard. His latest creation is a hydroelectric generator, which turns waste into petroleum products. He hopes to commercialize his innovations and create employment opportunities for young Nigerians.
Emeka Ugwueze is cutting a metal sheet to create a base for his latest invention at his workshop in Awka, a town in Nigeria's bustling southeastern state of Anambra. Ugwueze has created a prototype of a generator powered by water. The electricity it generates can last for over 6 hours, depending on the energy consumption rates of the units connected to it. He put together the first model in 2001 and has been progressively improving it. His machines are powered by high-voltage motorcycle batteries with no carbon emissions.
I actually lost a friend to a generator which actually brought about this, because I wanted to do something that can eliminate the use of gasoline generators in the society. So I'm actually an advocate of clean energy and waste management.
The 25-year-old started off as an automobile engineer, but then trained further in metallurgy at a technical college specializing in instrumentation and control systems. Emeka has now created over 12 machines that he hopes will solve problems across the environmental, health, and industrial sectors.
I usually source my raw materials from waste bins. In fact, I go and get discarded electronic components. At some point, friends do a lot of donating. Like people, you see what I do, you just love what I create. They just, okay, take this, use it to get this at the end of the day. So as things grows on, they keep on happening that way, even from social media. People have not even known me tend to donate some money just to make sure that the dream doesn't die off.
Chika Ibe, Emeka's neighbor, has been using the hydroelectric generator for over a year.
It's very, very excellent. I'm even begging him to, sell for me, but he said that is not possible now. I'm even waiting for any time that he has produced it on going to the market. That is must. I must even purchase like 5 for myself and my family.
At the end of the day, you end up seeing that it's actually real. I'm not saying that we arrived there yet. It still has its own flaws.
Nigeria has suffered from decades of chronic blackouts, and it's estimated that about 18 million people don't have access to grid power supplies in Africa's most populated country. Most businesses and homes are forced to run on diesel or petrol-powered generators.
Nigeria's only Prime Minister, late Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, is being remembered as a national hero instrumental to the struggle for the country's independence. In Bauchi state, where he hails from, a public lecture and prayer is organized by the state government in his honor, while the state chapter of the student union stage a march on the streets demanding that a public holiday is declared every year to celebrate him. Meanwhile, 56 years after his death, the state government is sponsoring a legislative bill that seeks to make 15 of every year a day set aside to honor Nigeria's only Prime Minister, late Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa.
In this site lies the remains of one of Nigeria's national heroes and the first Prime Minister, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa. Beyond the architectural design are memories of the late Prime Minister, symbolizing his personal and national achievements. These two alternating staircases leading to his grave depicts challenges of colonialism and the joy of freedom from British colony. For the first time since his assassination on the 15th of January 1966, the state government is holding a public lecture and prayers in his honor.
We're so flamboyantly advertised all over, but Bauchi unfortunately have not been able to do that. But Alhamdulillah, it has come to stay. Now we have started.
Some of his personal effects are displayed in this room, depicting a modest lifestyle which present-day leaders are advised to emulate.
He died, left office without having mansions, without having fleet of cars. And he was hardworking in the sense that he devoted his entire life to the progress of Nigeria. And he was a nationalist, a patriotic citizen.
This is indeed necessary now, at least for the leaders we have today. Let them see that even in death, you can still be emulated by people.
His son shares life lessons gained from his father.
He taught us to be very humble. He taught us to be very amicable and acceptable to people.
Marching in his honor on the streets of Bauchi metropolis are college students.
We march today in honor or in remembrance of our legend, Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa.
Sir Tafawa Balewa's oratory skills earned him the nickname, the Golden Voice of Africa. The labor of heroes like him should not be in vain for the sake of peace and unity. Hajara Aliyu, Channels Television News.
Following last week's clashes in the Central African Republic city of Alindao, UN peacekeepers are now patrolling the city to protect civilians. 2 members of the country's armed forces were killed in the incident. Spokesperson for the UN Secretary General Stefan Dujarric says some 2,000 displaced people, about 640 families have lost their shelter and belongings and are in urgent need of assistance. The hashtag #MeToo movement may have given women's rights a boost for the drive for gender equality, still facing 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Now, that's according to Nigeria's novelist and activist Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, who was speaking on the sidelines of a conference in Santiago, Chile. Adichie says women may be making strides in the workplace and public life, but they still bear the majority of the domestic load.
The Me Too movement in many parts of the world made it possible for women to start talking about things that women just haven't been able to talk about. So for me, that's progress of sorts. Because of course what also happens, I think, is often it feels as though it's 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards. And we're talking about it, but I think that we haven't quite found the solutions yet. I think with women, we are talking about equal pay for equal work, which is important. We're talking about political representation, which is important, but we're not talking enough about cultural things. And I think those things hold women back. I think the idea of domestic work, for example, who does domestic work? And is domestic work something that people should be paid for? So women now are doubly burdened. And so what can seem like equality really isn't. So I feel that in the future, we have to address that. Otherwise, I think it will take women back even more.
Well, still to come on the program. One person shot dead and dozens injured after demonstrators clashed with police in Kenya's Kasarani district. Please stay with us.